Thank you everyone so much for joining us today. My name is Leah Althauser and I'm your environmental education coordinator. This event is part of our Wild Washington program. It's a career connections event, and it's a way for folks to explore different careers in natural resources. The event will be recorded today, and it will be recorded on our YouTube channel and placed there for those who are maybe unable to watch it or interested in watching it later. We have enabled closed captioning, so if you'd like to turn it off, please click the button with the 2 C's at the bottom right. It may also be like 3 periods, a little ellipses, and you'll see an option for turning off the subtitles. If you're in our Zoom, we won't be taking verbal questions, or if you're on Facebook Live, so please pop your name or pop your question in the Q&A or pop it on Facebook, and we will answer it at the end. I'm really excited about our presentation today. We have a great program for you. We're going to be learning about different types of careers in GIS and how WDFW uses GIS a little bit. And so I'm excited to present and introduce Ian Truella, who works in our GIS program with lands, and he's going to tell you a little bit more about some of the work that he does, as well as some of the other GIS work at the department. So thank you, Ian, for joining us.
Thank you. Give me 1 second, I will share my screen. All right, well, thank you all for joining me today. And I'm here to talk about GIS and how we use it, what it is, and things like that here at WDFW. So first off, who am I? Who is this guy that's talking to you today? Well, my name is Ian Truella. I'm a senior GIS specialist here at the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I work within the wildlife program here. Our agency is broken into several programs, and the wildlife program focuses on wildlife management and habitat management for the lands that the agency owns. There's a whole slew of other GIS staff here who work at the agency. Those who focus on the fish program, some work in the habitat program, some work in our central IT staff. There's a whole array of different GIS staff here. But my focus is primarily working with our lands division and supporting our wildlife program. I joined the agency back in 2017 after some time on the East Coast of the United States. And I will get into my professional timeline towards the end of the slideshow today, so I can kind of go over some more information about that for those looking to pursue this career. Also, on the lighter side of things, I'm a proud father of a new Corgi puppy. This is Beckham. He's just turning 6 months old tomorrow. So he's a good boy, but hopefully he keeps quiet during this presentation today. So what is GIS? Well, first, it's geographic, and then information systems. So let's go over some what those two mean. So geographic. So the geography is the study of the location and description of diverse physical, biological, and cultural features on Earth's surface. What do I mean by that? Physical are things like mountains, rivers, coastlines, and your soil types. Biological could be tree cover, species home ranges, ecosystem types. And cultural would be things like your boundaries, your roads, your cities, your churches, all the things that are human-made on the landscape. The second part of the definition here would be information system. An information system is an integrated set of components that collect, process, store, and distribute information. So we are responsible for gathering data, the locations of where certain features are on the landscape. We process that data. Sometimes that needs a little massaging to make it actually worthwhile and useful information. We store that data in ways that are easily retrievable and ways that we can use it for analyses in the future, and also so that we have it for archiving purposes. And we distribute that information. So we provide maps, we provide spreadsheets, we provide analyses for different customers within the agency and outside the agency. Many of you may have looked at some of the maps on our webpage. Those are us distributing this information about where things are. So now that you know kind of what a GIS is, I want you to take a couple seconds here and pop in the Q&A and some examples of what you may think a GIS is that you are familiar with. And then we'll go over a couple well-known examples here. I'll give you a little bit. Yep. Okay. So let's take a look at a couple of these here. Some well-known GIS examples that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. The first one that I'm sure is very popular, you have Google Maps, Apple Maps, all of those products. That is a GIS. They store a vast amount of data, and they provide that information to the public about where things are on the planet. Another one, you have the 911 or 911 and police services. Here, almost all modern 911 systems are utilize some form of GIS. In this case, this is Seattle's dashboard for their calls for service for the police department there. And it takes a little bit of time to load here, but it does will eventually show some points here of where some of these calls are originating from. It's helpful for them to detect patterns or dispatch employees and things like that. A lot of uses there. We have weather modeling. Right now, you're seeing a map of the wind, the current wind in the Washington area and the surrounding landscapes. All of that is driven by data that is dependent on where that data is. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to predict our weather as we are today. And another one here, if you are a hunter, this is kind of a plug-in for the WDFW side of things. Here we have our Hunt Planner, which is an application available on our website that allows individuals to go in and see different regulations on our big game hunting, where our game management units are, and kind of figure out where they want to do their hunting in the current license year. Okay, so how do we use GIS here at WDFW? Well, there's a whole bunch of different examples, but I'm going to go through a couple here. First off, the agency owns over 1 million acres of land, and we are responsible for mapping and knowing where all of those lands actually are, where all of our easements are, where all of our ownership is, everywhere that we have an interest in. So in my group within the agency, we're responsible for mapping all of that information and tracking all of that. So here you can see a video of kind of one of our typical days in mapping some of our lands. We are browsing around the landscape. We are looking at certain data that we already have. We have county parcel information. We are reading deeds. We're reading legal descriptions, and we're translating that into a spatial representation of the land that we have an interest in. So here, Sierra is working on mapping a legal description that we have for something that needs to be entered into our GIS. So let this play here for a second. So right now she's going in and reading that description and entering in the direction and the length for all of these legal description meets and bounds. Sometimes it's as easy as looking at the public land survey system and, okay, this is only just one square within this quadrant of this township or section. But sometimes it's a bit more complicated, and we have to to enter in some of this information manually. But as you can see, this polygon is almost completely drawn and will be done. And then we enter in some attribute information about it to keep track of that polygon throughout time. Okay. We also use it to keep track of all of our facilities. Here you can see a bridge on one of our wildlife areas. And we use that information to, one, keep track of what facilities we have out there so we can promote that information on our maps and our website, but also to manage it. We need to manage the cost. We need to know how many miles of roads are out there to maintain, to budget, and things like that. So here you can see Sierra again, digitizing a road that we have. In this case, we're just kind of tracing it along the aerial imagery that we have access to. But there's other times we just import data that others have already made. But we also keep track of things like buildings, parking lots, boat launches, signs, all sorts of different facilities out there that we're responsible for. And the list keeps on growing. The more that we develop our lands for recreation and habitat management and things like that, the more that we're responsible for keeping track of. Another big thing that our agency uses GIS for is wildlife telemetry. Now, there's another group within the wildlife program that really tackles this, but I'm going to speak to that a little bit. Paul Whalen is our kind of the guy. So I'm going to show a little dashboard that he created that helps us illustrate what kind of information we're gathering from all these radio collars and GPS collars we have out there. This dashboard shows you kind of the current picture of how many collars we have out there, where they are, what kind of events we're getting. If a collar is responding that it hasn't moved in a couple of days, maybe that animal has passed, alerting us to go out and check things. We can see kind of how many fixes we're getting every day, and kind of get an overall sense of what the collars are doing out there on the landscape, on those individuals. Some folks in the agency do habitat analyses. But here, this is from the folks in the habitat program. They've done some work in mapping tree cover. This is all done through certain raster processing to just pull out where all the trees are. So that allows them to, over time, map where trees have either returned or have been, there's been some deforestation or development. So it allows us to track some of that information on a large scale. We're talking county, state level size scale, and not individual sites. So pretty cool stuff. We're also recently getting into drone surveys. I know that tech has been around for maybe about 10 years now, but we're just kind of exploring that a little bit. I was fortunate enough last week to go out and kind of to see some of this information or some of this work in action. And I got a cool little video here for y'all. This was down in Tenino. We were doing some surveys where we were doing some testing on how well we can use some drones for some wildlife surveys. And we were doing some testing on this little 1 acre plot that we plug into the tablet, and it determines what transects it needs to fly to get that imagery. And we just hit the go button. It does all the things that it needs to do, and it sends it up. And here you can see it's flying at about 50 feet altitude. And it just goes back and forth, capturing that information. That'll eventually allows us to plug those photos into software that kind of stitches them all together and gets us some really cool, really accurate and up-to-date aerial imagery, and doesn't make us rely on third-party services for some of that information, or wait 2-3 years until the state collaborates and gets some aerial flights flown. So you can see here, it's almost finished with its transect here, and it's going to go up to about 65 feet altitude and then return back home. now that it has completed its flight of that 1 acre plot. So all of that is done in the software. There's no manual input in this at all, and it makes it super easy to kind of collect that information. So it's pretty cool stuff. I'll let this finish here. You can see it's just going to end up returning back to where it took off from. Slowly, carefully. You can see the camera there on the bottom that's using to take pictures, and we almost got it to land back on the box, but not quite. There's so much more that we use GIS for here in the agency, and I only have so much time to talk about it today, but I just really want one quick more example. And this is our web map for our marine areas and fishing areas that folks up in the fish program are responsible for, and it's really cool stuff. Dale did a great job, and we map all of the line work and all of the regulations that that govern fishing within the state. It's cool stuff. So what does an average day of a GIS worker look like? Well, it really depends on what your interest is. Depending on what you want to do, you can focus on cartography. And unfortunately, during this presentation, these maps are not loading. But let me do a quick refresh here. Nope, those seem to have, oh, there they go. Okay. You can focus on making things look a certain way. If you're really interested in design. Here you can see this is the exact same data, but stylized a little bit differently. One, you have this kind of futuristic look. Here, you have another one that's tweaked to make it look like it's painted with a watercolor. Some folks are really talented in making beautiful map products. And if you're interested in design, that is definitely something that you can do. You can focus on data stewardship and editing if you enjoy working with data, spreadsheets, if you enjoy looking through spreadsheets or looking at maps. Here you can see this is an example of some of the software we use called ArcGIS Pro, and us editing some of our road data. We have the attribute table open for linear referencing. So you can really kind of dive into that information and work with that. It's enjoyable, I think. If you're into engineering, you can focus on the software and data development side of things. Here you can see this is a Python script as part of a toolbox that we've developed. So if you really like to build things and work with code, GIS is also a great field for that. It's especially moving towards that direction quickly, where software development and scripting will help you a lot in this field. And it's helpful if you find some enjoyment out of it. If you're really interested in the science side of things, obviously there's tons and tons of room for spatial analyses that you can do. In this example, you can see that they're collecting all sorts of different data sets like land cover, soil type, slope, distance from streams, kind of combining all that information based on scientific analyses to calculate suitability indices at a location. So you can see spots where things might be occurring, or areas that you want to focus your attention on for habitat management. Looks like that. But the cool thing is you can do any of these things at any level. You can mix coding and cartography. You can mix science and raw data. You can mix coding and science. There's no limit to what you can do. It allows you to kind of make your own niche a little bit. So what do I like? What don't I like about this field? Well, let's start with the good things. I'm kind of a geek at heart. I love the technology side of things. I grew up loving working with computers and tech and things like that. So I love that side of things. I love the code. I love the hardware, all that, the new bleeding edge tech out there, the cloud, all that stuff. To me, I love that. The organized side of me, I like working with the data and keeping that organized. It does take a little bit of discipline to make sure you keep your information organized. I'm not the most creative person here, but I will say that working in GIS does scratch that itch. I'm able to make some neat looking maps at times. Like this background for this slide was using raw data that I was able to access, and make that into a nicer looking product out there. But in the end, I really just love maps. I've always loved looking at maps. I've always loved browsing Google Maps. Sometimes I just find myself looking at maps. They just fascinate me. And as somebody like that, GIS is the perfect field. And some of the not so good things about this career field. So right now, unless you go into development or management, there isn't a heck of a lot of vertical room for career progression. But I will say it's pretty easy to break into development or management if that's something that you want to pursue. There's lots of materials out there to teach yourself some of the software development and things like that. Most of my experience has been self-taught, and I'm sure all of you who want to move ahead and learn development are more than capable of reaching out onto the internet and finding out information about what you can do to be a better software engineer for GIS purposes. Also, there's a lot to keep up with the new technologies. It's always changing. You're always going to have new technologies out there, and the pace is just getting quicker and quicker. It seems like every couple months there's something new I got to do some investigative work on and figure out, okay, what can we use this new technology for? Is it useful? Is it worth it? And what do I need to do to even learn it? There's a lot to keep an eye on. Additionally, some may say that this is moving away from a profession of GIS to GIS needs to be just a skill in somebody's toolbox. But that's not to say that it's not going away. There's still going to be a huge need for GIS experience, and there's definitely room to make a complete career out of it. And sometimes you just want to go nuts because of you're hitting against the wall with bugs that you're always running into. Since some of the software that you're working with daily, and you're more of a power user, you're going to run into a lot of bugs that just don't make sense. We ran into a couple yesterday. It's just no idea, and it's just something we got to kind of let slide and deal with it. You know, it's something that comes up, and you just kind of gotta roll with the punches there. All right. So like I said, I'll get into kind of my career path and how I got here. So I graduated high school back in 2006, and I started my undergraduate as a wildlife science major at the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry. And throughout this time, I'm going to highlight some of these green areas, and that's where I really used or was introduced to GIS. Because prior to my undergraduate work, I had no idea GIS was even a thing. And it wasn't until my junior year of undergraduate that I got into just an intro to GIS class. That was required for my major. And then kind of saw, oh yeah, this is pretty cool stuff. And then started working with it in my wildlife practicum class and my wildlife management class, where we had to do some analyses and write some management plans. And it wasn't until then that I really kind of saw the power of what GIS could do for the wildlife management side of things. So I graduated there in 2010 with the wildlife science major. At that time, I wasn't really focused on GIS as a career. I was looking, okay, maybe I want to do some more wildlife management, wildlife research. So I ventured into graduate school at the Texas A&M University, Kingsville, in range and wildlife management. And I really wasn't focused on GIS work there. I was working on some bobwhite quail research at the time, but I was able to to do some bit of GIS work, just a quick little kind of side research project there over the winter of 2011, 2012, looking at some raster analyses on relative predator abundance on bobwhite nesting success. But other than that, during my graduate school, I didn't really touch GIS a whole lot. Wasn't until back early in 2014 that I started working with the Pennsylvania Game Commission. I moved back to Pennsylvania, and I was looking at what I wanted to do. And I stumbled on an opportunity with the Pennsylvania Game Commission for the Northwest region GIS specialist. And there I worked on data management, cartography. I helped our managers create maps for their game lands management plans. I helped manage all of the facility data, all of our forest data on those lands there in the state, in the Northwest region, eventually included parts of the Southwest region as well. So I worked there for 3 years, really focused on GIS. That was my job. And then, like I mentioned earlier, I came here to DFW, looking to kind of expand my career a bit, and took the role as a senior GIS specialist, where I'm working on data development and application development, some project development or project management. So we're working on developing applications to manage specific data for facilities, for cultural resources, for our land information system, things like that, and kind of building out those systems. So, and that's where I have been for the past 5 years. So, like I said, I mean, I didn't go out looking for GIS as a career, but I'm sure glad I found it. I really do think it's a great profession. And like I said, what I presented was just one path. I know many other staff who went about it in a completely different way. Some went and minored in GIS because they knew about it way back when they started undergraduate, or some folks got into it in graduate school. But that's not saying that you need to even go to graduate school. We have folks who came here from undergraduate and they've had some GIS experience and do great work. So with that, that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any other questions you guys have. You are muted.
Second time today. Thank you. Thank you for that awesome presentation. I learned a lot about the work the department does and how to get some of the work that GIS incorporates. I would never thought about 911 or weather. We do have a few questions for you. Our first question is, how much GIS experience do you need for an entry-level job at the department?
Sure. You're going to need some experience with some of the, I guess, bigger software companies out there, particularly Esri. And within the agency and the vast majority of other government shops are users of the software called ArcGIS, developed by Esri, a company called Esri. And what we look for is a lot of experience with that. And if you do some internships with like BOR, DNR, all sorts of other federal agencies or state agencies, you're going to get experience with that. If you're going to be some sort of field tech or just some sort of internship working with GIS, you'll be exposed to that software almost certainly. And for an entry-level job, that's really what we're looking for, is experience with that ecosystem, attention to detail, and experience in usually editing data.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, how is data for GIS collected?
Sure. It really depends. As you saw in the presentation, data can be all sorts of different things. We have vector data where we're hand drawing it. We can have vector data that we are collecting via GPS units. Somebody could be driving along a trail and having a GPS unit on them collecting that information, or just points, or the drone. That is data that we are collecting, taking all those pictures and processing that information there's all sorts of different things. You can do satellite, yeah, aircraft, you can do drones, you can do walking, you can do sitting at a computer digitizing. It's there's no limit to how that information can get in there.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
So this is another question, and this is the way it's written. I really enjoy being outside, but I'm also really interested in GIS. What does your field work versus computer work look like?
It really depends on where you are in your career, and you can make it what you want. We have staff who work with GIS out in the field a lot. Our field biologists that we develop some forms for, some survey 1, 2, 3 forms for. That's collecting GIS information, and they're out there in the field doing that work. But it's not so focused on the GIS side of things, but it's more the biological data. But you're still using GIS. The more you focus on the GIS side of things, the more that kind of leads you to the office work and sitting at a computer. That's the information side of things, information system side of things that you're getting into. So right now, almost all of my work is in the office. Now, when I was working with the Pennsylvania Game Commission, most of my work was in the office just because I needed to use a computer, but there were times I was personally responsible to collect that data. So I would go out there, drive some of those roads, take some pictures of signs, things like that. So it does give you the opportunity, depending on what your role is, to get out in the field.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Our next question is, I have an undergraduate degree in wildlife science, and I see a lot of graduate certificates in GIS. Do you think it's worthwhile for the field?
That I'm not sure. So a graduate certificate, not a graduate degree. I'll say I don't think it's required. It does help, but I don't think it's required. I think it helps by giving you access to or experience with some of these software products that we're looking for. But I don't think it's required. If you have the initiative to kind of work with some of this information, or have the ability to have an internship or a entry-level position somewhere, that gives you access to some of the software and using some of that software on a daily basis. We're going to look at that just as well as any other graduate certificate or GIS certificate.
Great, thank you. And does the department offer internships that are based in GIS or entry-level positions?
We do have entry-level positions. Unfortunately, I don't know of any that we're hiring right now. But we're open to the idea of doing internships. It's just we are a little swamped with some other things right now. So that's definitely something that we want to branch into, and getting some interns to do some GIS work.
Great. Do you have any recommendations for getting your foot in the door with you or other members of the GIS team?
Sure. Participate in some of the GIS events or GIS groups within the state. We have them annually in November, GIS Day. So you can participate in that, or some of the other statewide organizations, WIRIS, things like that. And you can always reach out to us. I mean, we are more than welcome to if you have any questions, just start building that network a little bit, and kind of, yeah, you get your foot in the door that way.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Our next one is, does WDFW have any current community science programs that have a GIS component? I participated in the Shrub Stuff Songbird survey a few years ago. Is there anything like that underway now?
That I am not sure of. Within my group, we don't particularly do that, but I know some of the other folks in the wildlife program and the habitat program do that, and I can do some follow-up if you would like.
Yeah, that would be great. I'm trying to think.
Yeah, I don't know if my contact information is provided, but feel free to shoot me an email if you'd like.
And we did have a mention of our the Pacific Northwest Bumblebee Atlas, which I will pop into our chat here, which is, I think, part of our wildlife diversity division. So you can go out and get bumblebees. Our next question is, you mentioned moving up in GIS, you might want to look into GIS software development. Can you describe a little bit more about what that looks like?
Sure. The way the industry is moving, there's a lot of tools and things out there, but what really helps you along is learning out how to kind of automate some of that boring stuff, right? You don't want to just sit there and manually go through every cell in a spreadsheet or things like that. So what you can do is trying to learn what software is out there, what you can write, what code you can write to make that job a little bit easier, and make you a bit more effective at that job. There's some great resources out there for that. Like I said, there's one called, if you want to learn some Python development, there's a book, free ebook called Automate the Boring Stuff. Now that's kind of everyday stuff and not tailored to GIS, but you can leverage what you've learned going through that daily in GIS just to make your life a little bit easier. And it's not to say that Python is the only software that you should learn, or the only code that you should learn. There's, if you want to develop maps for the web, which is definitely the direction the agencies and the industry is going, you can learn JavaScript and HTML and CSS and modern web development, and just kind of sprinkle some GIS in there, and consume some GIS data, some geospatial data. Or if you really want to be on the data or database side of things, you can start learning some SQL or SQL. So, yeah.
Awesome. It seems like there's a lot of potential to do a million different things. And so there's the opportunity for variety within this career.
Absolutely. That's one of the things I loved about it. I grew up in the natural resource background. That's kind of what I was thinking I was going to do for my career. But then there's always been that side of me, that geeky kid who just loved video games and playing on the computer and things like that. And I kind of found my niche here where I have the natural aspect of things here at DFW, but I'm also heavily working on the technological side of things that I love.
Sort of a follow-up question out of my own curiosity is, how does your background in wildlife management help you with GIS?
Sure. It allows me to approach, I guess, some of the problems in a different way than I think most IT people do. So looking at things in the, okay, how does this actually benefit? Why are we doing this? What's the end game here for the wildlife management side of things? What are we doing in this analysis that helps the end goal? And it just, yeah. I didn't get entrenched in some of the typical IT world, IT language in my my schooling. So it's definitely a little bit different. I approach problems a little bit differently than staff in come through like the central IT world. So.
Yeah, I'm sure that helps with problem solving.
I don't know if it's a benefit, but it adds diversity, and diversity is always great. So.
Absolutely. Well, Ian, that's the last of our questions. Thank you so much for doing this. It's been really informative and I'm sure really helpful for a lot of folks. And if you're interested, check out that YouTube channel that I posted in the beginning. And otherwise, have a great day, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you all.